If you are watching this video, I want you to do something for me before you settle in. Because what I am about to tell you, I have never told another living soul outside my own family. And I think it deserves more than just a quiet watch and a scroll away. Type in the comments below where in the world you are watching this from right now, because I would love to know how far these words are traveling. And if you have not already done so, press that like button and subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like mine waiting to be told, and I do not want you to miss a single one. Now, come sit with me a while. Pour yourself something warm to drink, because this is a long story, and it is not an easy one. But I promise you, by the end of it, you will understand why an old woman like me still cries when she talks about her father, 40 years after he sent her away. My name is Ruth. I was born in a small Amish community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a farmhouse with no electricity and no running water, in a bedroom that I shared with 3 of my sisters. I am telling you this story now because I am 71 years old, and I have carried the weight of it for most of my life. And I think it is time the world heard it. Not because I need anyone's sympathy, but because I think somewhere out there someone is carrying a similar weight, and maybe my story can lighten it, even just a little. I grew up the way most Amish children grow up. Mornings began before the sun rose, with the smell of my mother's biscuits and the sound of my father's boots on the wooden floor as he headed out to the barn. We did not have toys bought from a store. We had corn husk dolls and homemade wooden tops, and fields that stretched out further than a child's eyes could measure. And we thought that was enough, because it was all we knew. My father, his name was Samuel, was a quiet man. He was not the kind of father who spoke much, but he was the kind of father whose presence you always felt, even in silence. He had hands like leather from years of working the soil, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale blue and steady. When I was small, he used to lift me onto his shoulders while he checked the fences, and he would point out the hawks circling above the fields and tell me their names in our language, and I remember thinking that my father knew everything there was to know about the world, even though he had never left our county in his entire life. There were 7 of us children, and I was the 4th, right in the middle, which meant I was neither the one who got the most attention nor the one who got the least. I was in many ways invisible in my own family, except to my father. For reasons I did not understand until much later in my life, my father always had a soft spot for me. He would slip me an extra piece of chouflé pie when my mother was not looking, and on the nights when the other children were already sleeping, he would sometimes sit outside with me on the porch step and just breathe in the night air together, saying nothing at all. I remember one particular spring, I must have been about 10 years old, when a late frost threatened to ruin the season's first planting, and my father stayed up 2 full nights in a row, walking the fields with lanterns, trying to protect what he could. I remember sneaking out of the house in my nightgown, barefoot in the cold grass, because I could not sleep knowing he was out there alone, and I found him kneeling beside a row of young seedlings, speaking to them in a low voice, almost like a prayer. When he saw me, he did not scold me for being out of bed. He simply lifted me onto his hip, even though I was really too big for it by then, and he said, "Ruthie, sometimes the things we love most need us most in the hours when no one else is watching." I did not understand what he meant then. I understand it now more than I ever wanted to. My mother often said that I was the child most like my father in temperament, though we did not look particularly alike. She meant it as a kind of warning, I think, because my father, beneath his quiet exterior, carried a deep and private intensity. A way of turning things over and over in his mind long after everyone else had moved on. I inherited that. When something troubled me as a girl, I could not simply set it aside the way my sisters seemed able to. I would turn it over at night, examining it from every angle, unable to rest until I had wrestled some kind of peace from it. My father used to notice this in me, and on the rare evenings we sat together on the porch step in silence, I believe now that he recognized a kindred restlessness in me. The same restlessness that would later drive him to spend months quietly investigating a danger the rest of our community could not see. We did not have much in the way of material comfort, but I do not remember feeling poor as a child. I remember feeling rich in small, specific ways. The way sunlight fell through the barn slats in thin golden ropes during afternoon chores. The sound of my mother's treadle sewing machine humming through the house on winter evenings. The taste of the first strawberries of the season. So sweet after a long, plain winter of preserved food that I once cried, simply from the pleasure of eating one. My father used to say that a person who could find joy in a strawberry would never truly be poor, no matter what else life took from them, and I have thought of that saying often across the harder years of my life, and found, more often than not, that he was right. There was a hymn we sang most Sundays, slow and unadorned the way all our hymns were, without instruments, simply voices raised together in a single long unhurried breath. And I remember my father's voice among the others, deep and a little rough, never quite in tune, but full of a sincerity that made it, to my ears, the most beautiful sound in the entire service. I did not know, sitting beside him on those hard wooden benches, all the ways his voice would one day go silent toward me, all the ways 5 decades of unspoken love would build up behind a wall of careful, protective distance. I only knew as a child that I loved to sit close enough to hear him sing, off-key and unashamed, beside me. By the time I had reached 14, I had already learned to sew a quilt from start to finish, to bake bread that did not sink in the middle, and to milk a cow before the sun came up. I was being groomed, as all young Amish girls are, for a life much like my mother's, a life of quiet service, of marriage, of children, of faith. And for a long while, I believed that was the life I wanted. I did not question it. Why would I? I had never seen anything different. But there was something in me, even then, that made me a little different from my sisters. I asked questions. I wondered about the English world beyond our fields, the cars that occasionally passed on the main road, the electric lights I sometimes saw glowing in the distance when we rode into town. My mother used to scold me for staring too long at those lights. She would say, "Ruth, curiosity is the devil's whisper," and I would nod and lower my eyes. But inside, that whisper never fully went away. When I turned 15, something changed in our community. Something that at the time I did not fully understand, but that would come to shape the rest of my life. A man named Eli Stoltzfus, a widower nearly 20 years my senior, began attending more of the gatherings that included the young, unmarried women. He had lost his first wife 2 years before, a woman named Katie, under circumstances that were spoken of only in hushed voices among the older women in our district. I remember overhearing my mother and my aunt speaking about it once, when they thought I was out of earshot. They said Katie had died of a fall down the porch steps, alone, in the middle of the night, and that Eli had been the one to find her in the morning. They said it in a tone that made the hair rise on the back of my neck, though I could not have told you why at the time. Eli began to take a particular interest in me. He would find reasons to speak to my father after church services. He would bring extra jars of honey to our home, saying his bees had produced more than his own household could use. My mother thought this was a fine thing, a respectable man showing interest in a hard-working young woman, and she began to speak of it approvingly at the supper table, saying things like, "Ruth, you could do far worse than a man who owns his own land outright." But my father said nothing. My father, who always had an opinion about everything from crop rotation to which hymn should open a service, said nothing at all when Eli Stoltzfus's name came up. And looking back now, that silence should have told me everything, because my father was not a man who stayed silent unless something inside him was working very hard to hold itself together. I did not think much of it at the time. I was 15, then 16, and I was more concerned with quilting bees and barn dances and the ordinary business of growing up. I did not know that my father had begun making quiet inquiries of his own, traveling further than usual on supposed business trips, speaking with men from neighboring districts even, I would later learn, speaking once with an English police officer in the next county over, a man he had done carpentry work for years before. I did not know that my father had learned things about Eli Stoltzfus that made his blood run cold. I did not know that another young woman, from a district 2 counties away, had once been engaged to Eli before Katie, and had broken it off suddenly, moving away with her family not long after, and that when my father tracked down her family through a mutual contact, they would not speak more than a few careful words to him, except to say, "Tell your daughter to run." I did not know any of this. All I knew at 16 years old was that Eli Stoltzfus had begun to speak more directly with my father about courting me, and that my father had begun to change. He grew quieter. He grew watchful. He started walking me to and from the schoolhouse where I helped teach the younger children, even though it was only a short distance and perfectly safe by every standard our community held. He started asking me, almost every evening, small questions about my day, where I had been, who I had spoken to, in a way that felt less like a father's curiosity and more like a father standing guard. And then, one evening in early autumn, when the leaves had just begun to turn along the fence lines, everything changed. I remember it was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day we did the wash, and my hands still smelled of lye soap when my father called me into the barn after supper. My mother was inside with the younger children. My older siblings were already married and living in their own homes by then. It was just my father and me, standing among the hay bales in the fading light, and I remember the way the dust floated in the last beams of sun coming through the cracks in the wood siding. He told me to sit down on an overturned bucket, and I did. And I remember thinking, from the look on his face, that someone had died. I had never seen my father look the way he looked that evening. His jaw was tight. His eyes, that pale winter blue, were wet, though he did not let a single tear fall. He told me that I could no longer stay in his house. He told me that I had brought shame upon our family, that my behavior, my questions, my restlessness had gone too far, and that it was time for me to leave and make my own way, whether that meant staying somewhere else in the community, or, if I chose, leaving entirely for the English world. He said it in a voice that did not sound like my father's voice at all. It was flat and cold and final, in a way that terrified me more than any anger could have. I remember falling to my knees on that barn floor, begging him to tell me what I had done wrong. I remember asking him, over and over, "Father, what did I do? Please, just tell me what I did, and I will fix it. I will be better. I promise I will be better." And he would not answer me. He simply stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, and told me that my bags were already packed, that a driver, an English man he had hired, would take me to my mother's cousin's house 2 states away in the morning, and that this was not a discussion. I want you to understand something about our world, about the Amish world, before I go further. When a father tells a child they must leave, especially under a cloud of shame, it is not like a fight in an English household that blows over in a week. It is a fracture that can last generations. I did not know, that night, whether I would ever see my family again. I did not know if this was a temporary punishment, or if I had, in some way I could not comprehend, ended my place in my family forever. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed I shared with my sisters, and I listened to them breathing steadily in their sleep, and I wondered what I had done. I turned over every memory of the past year, every conversation, every small rebellion, searching for the crime my father believed I had committed. I could not find it. I still to this day cannot point to a single moment and say, "There, that is the thing that made him send me away." Because the truth, the real truth, had nothing to do with me at all. Though it would take me over 40 years to learn that. In the morning, my father did not come to say goodbye. My mother wept at the door, pressing a small cloth bag of dried apples and a family Bible into my hands, whispering that she did not understand it either, but that a wife obeys her husband and a mother, in our world, does not override a father's decision, even when her heart is breaking. My younger siblings watched from the porch, confused, silent, not understanding why their sister was climbing into a strange car with an English driver, wearing her plain dress and bonnet, clutching a single suitcase. I looked back at the house as we pulled away down the gravel drive, and for one moment, just one, I saw a curtain move in the upstairs window of the room I knew to be my parents' bedroom. I saw a shape behind the glass, and though I could not be certain, I believed then, and I believe now, that it was my father, watching me leave, unable to face me directly, but unable to let me go without watching until I was out of sight. The drive to my mother's cousin's house took the better part of 2 days, with a stop overnight at a motel that felt to me, at 16, like something from another planet entirely. I had never seen a television before. I had never slept in a room lit by electric lamps. I remember lying awake most of that night, not because of the strange surroundings, but because grief has a way of keeping the body from resting, no matter how tired the mind becomes. My mother's cousin, a woman named Fanny, had left the Amish community herself some 20 years before, and lived a quiet Mennonite life in Ohio with her husband and 2 children. She was kind to me, kinder than I expected from a stranger, but she, too, seemed to know nothing of why my father had sent me away, only that he had written her a brief letter asking if she could take me in for a time, and that he had enclosed enough money to cover my keep for several months. I lived with Fanny for almost a year. During that time, I learned to read fluently in English, having only had basic schooling in our own dialect before. I learned to use a telephone, though I had no one to call. I learned what a supermarket was, and I remember standing frozen in the aisles the first time I saw so much food gathered under one roof, more food than our entire district might see in a season. I got a job at a small diner in town, washing dishes at first, and then eventually waiting tables, and the English customers found my modest dress and quiet manners curious, though most were kind enough about it. I wrote to my father every single week during that first year. I wrote asking forgiveness for a sin I could not name. I wrote asking him to explain what I had done. I wrote telling him about my new life, hoping that if he saw I was surviving, thriving even, he might soften and call me home. I received exactly 3 letters back from him in that entire year, and each one was short. Formal, telling me only that he hoped I was well, that my mother sent her love, and that he could not, at this time, discuss the reasons for my leaving. He never once, in those letters, told me he missed me. He never once told me he loved me. And I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because for a girl of 16, 17 years old, that kind of silence from a father who had once carried you on his shoulders to watch the hawks, that kind of silence can carve a hole in a person that takes decades to fill. I learned, much later from my sister Lydia, what happened in our district in the weeks after I left. The story my father allowed to circulate, that I had grown willful and disobedient, that I had been caught in behaviors unbecoming of a young Amish woman, that I had refused correction and ultimately chosen to leave rather than submit to the discipline of the church. Spread through our community the way any story does in a small, close world, gathering small embellishments with each retelling. Lydia told me that some of the older women clicked their tongues and said they had always suspected something restless in me, pointing to my old habit of staring too long at the English cars on the main road as evidence they had seen it coming all along. She told me that my mother bore this talk with a tight jaw and reddened eyes, never contradicting it, never explaining, carrying the public shame of a wayward daughter with the same silent suffering my father carried in private. Lydia also told me something that broke my heart all over again when I finally heard it, decades later. She told me that in the months after I left, my 2 younger sisters, Sarah and Miriam, who were only 12 and 10 at the time, were quietly warned by our mother to be extra obedient, extra careful, extra visible in their goodness at every gathering, as though the family needed to prove, through their behavior, that whatever flaw had produced a daughter like me had not spread to the rest of the household. I think of my little sisters sometimes, working so hard to be good in the shadow of a sister's disgrace they did not understand and could not ask about, and I feel a fresh wave of sorrow for the ripples that one evening in the barn sent through every corner of our family. Ripples my father surely anticipated, and yet judged, in his private calculation, to be a smaller cost than the alternative. I stayed with Fanny for a year, and then I moved further out on my own, taking a room above the diner where I worked, saving what little money I could. I want to be honest with you about this next part of my life, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering when you tell a story like this. The years that followed were not easy ones. I struggled with who I was. I had left behind the only identity I had ever known: plain dress, plain speech. A life built entirely around faith and family and community. And I had been thrown into a world that operated by entirely different rules, without anyone to guide me through it. I made mistakes in those years. I fell in with people who were not always good for me. I drank, on occasion more than I should have, trying to numb a grief I did not have words for. I dated men who did not treat me with the kind of respect I deserved, because somewhere inside me, I believed that I must have deserved to be cast aside, that whatever unnamed sin I had committed made me unworthy of real love. It took me years, real years, to understand that the way my father sent me away had nothing to do with my worth as a person, though at the time, it felt like the deepest possible verdict on my character. I remember one winter, I believe I was 19, when I was living in a small rented room above the diner, and I fell quite ill with a fever that kept me in bed for the better part of a week. I had no family nearby to check on me, No mother to bring broth to my bedside. No father to sit with me through the worst of the night sweats. My landlady, an elderly English widow named Mrs. Hutchins, found me one afternoon when I did not come down for my shift, and she took it upon herself to nurse me back to health with a gentleness I had not expected from a stranger. I remember lying in that narrow bed, delirious with fever, calling out for my mother in our old dialect, words Mrs. Hutchins could not understand but somehow still answered with soft, soothing sounds, the way you might comfort a frightened animal. When the fever finally broke, I cried for hours, not from relief, but from the aching absence of my own family in a moment when I had needed them most. It was in that small rented room, nursed by a stranger, that I first truly understood the size of what had been taken from me. I want to tell you about a young man I dated during that period of my life, because I think it illustrates something important about the damage that unexplained rejection can do to a person's sense of their own worth. His name was Daniel, and he worked at a garage 2 streets over from the diner. He was not unkind, not in any dramatic way, but he had a habit of testing how much I would tolerate before I would leave. Small cruelties disguised as jokes, promises made and quietly broken, attention given generously one week and withdrawn coldly the next. And I stayed. I stayed for nearly 2 years, far longer than any reasonable person should have stayed. And when I look back now, I understand exactly why. Some deep, wounded part of me had already accepted, at 16 years old, that I was the kind of person a family could cast aside without explanation, and so a man who treated me inconsistently did not feel like a warning sign to me. It felt, terribly, like something almost familiar. It was only after I finally found the strength to leave Daniel, encouraged gently but firmly by Mrs. Hutchins, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to me by then, that I began to understand how deeply my father's silence had shaped the way I allowed myself to be treated by others. I also want to tell you about the guilt I carried during those years. A different kind of guilt than the shame I had been sent away with. I felt guilty for surviving, for building any kind of life at all outside the community, as though thriving in the English world was itself a betrayal of the family I had left behind. I remember the first time I truly laughed again, really laughed, at a joke one of the other waitresses made during a slow shift at the diner, and how immediately afterward I felt a wave of guilt so strong it nearly made me sick, as though laughter itself was a kind of disloyalty to the pain still sitting unresolved back home. It took me a long while to understand that healing is not betrayal, that building a life for myself was not a rejection of the family I still loved. But I want to be honest that this understanding did not come easily or quickly. It came slowly, through many nights of quiet reckoning. Much like the restlessness my father used to notice in me as a girl, the same restlessness that would not let a wound simply sit unexamined. By the time I was 21, I had settled into a more stable life. I had married a kind Englishman named Robert, who worked as a mechanic, a gentle soul who never once asked me to explain the plain dresses still folded at the bottom of my closet, or the way I sometimes still bowed my head and murmured a prayer in Pennsylvania Dutch before meals out of old habit. We had 2 children together, a boy and a girl, and I built a life that, on the surface, looked nothing like the one I had been raised for, but that still carried, underneath it, all the values my mother and father had instilled in me before everything fell apart. Throughout those years, I maintained contact with my mother, mostly through letters, and occasionally, when my father was away on business, brief telephone calls arranged through an English neighbor of theirs who let my mother use their phone. My mother would update me on the family, on my siblings' marriages, on the births of nieces and nephews I would never meet in person, on the small, steady rhythms of a life continuing on without me. She never explained my father's reasons either, and I began to suspect, over time, that perhaps even she did not fully know them. I visited home exactly 4 times over the next 20 years. Each visit was arranged carefully, always while my father was working elsewhere, always brief, always tinged with a strange grief, because I would sit in my mother's kitchen, the same kitchen where I had learned to bake bread as a girl, and I would feel the absence of my father like a physical presence in the room, more felt than the empty chair at the head of the table. On one of those visits, when I was perhaps 35 years old, I finally worked up the courage to ask my mother directly. I said, "Mother, please, I am begging you, tell me what I did. I have turned over every memory I have from that year, and I cannot find the thing I did wrong." And my mother, bless her, took my hands in hers, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Ruth, I do not believe you did anything wrong at all. I believe your father was protecting you from something, though he has never told me what, and I believe that whatever it was, it broke something in him too, something that has never fully healed." I sat with those words for years afterward. Protecting me. From what? I turned the question over and over in my mind, through the rest of my 30s, through my 40s, through the slow accumulation of an ordinary American life, through the raising of my own children, through Robert's passing when I was 52, through the quiet ache of growing older with an unanswered question still lodged somewhere beneath my ribs. I want to pause here and tell you something, because I think it matters. Even without an explanation, even carrying that wound for decades, I never stopped loving my father. I want you to understand that forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not something that requires an explanation first. I forgave my father long before I understood why he had done what he did. I forgave him because I came to believe somewhere in my 30s that whatever had happened, it had cost him something too. That a man does not send away a daughter he loves without it costing him a piece of his own soul. I forgave him because carrying bitterness for 30 years is its own kind of prison, and I did not want to spend the rest of my life locked inside it. But forgiveness and understanding are 2 different things, and I still needed to understand. I want to tell you about one visit in particular, when I was 46 years old, because it is a memory that has stayed with me more vividly than almost any other from that long, silent middle stretch of my life. My daughter had just had her first child, my first grandchild, a little girl we named after my mother, and something about becoming a grandmother myself stirred in me a fierce need to see my father again, to bring my own grandchild, however briefly, into contact with the family she would otherwise never know. I called ahead, through the English neighbor who still let my mother use the telephone, and I asked if I might visit for a single afternoon. My mother agreed readily, but she warned me, gently, that my father had grown even quieter in his later years, that his hearing was beginning to fail, and that I should not expect much conversation from him. I told her I understood, though secretly, I still hoped, the way I had hoped for 30 years by then, that something might finally break loose between us. When I arrived, my father was sitting on the very same porch where we used to sit together in silence when I was a girl. He had aged considerably since I had last seen him, his hair fully white now, his hands beginning to show the first signs of the tremor that would worsen in his final years. When I placed my infant granddaughter into his arms, something happened that I have turned over in my memory 1,000 times since. His whole face changed, his eyes filled with tears, and he held that baby the way a man holds something he has been forbidden from holding for a very long time. Careful, reverent, almost afraid to breathe too heavily near her. He looked up at me then, and for one brief moment, I believed he was going to speak, truly speak, about everything that had happened between us. His mouth opened, and he said my name, just my name, Ruth, in a voice thick with something that sounded like the beginning of a confession. But then my mother called from the kitchen that the coffee was ready, and the moment passed, and my father closed his mouth and simply handed the baby back to me and said only, "She has your eyes," before falling back into the same careful silence he had maintained for 30 years by then. I left that afternoon aching in a way I had not ached in years, because I had come so close, closer than I had ever come before, to some kind of answer, and it had slipped away in the ordinary interruption of a coffee pot boiling on the stove. I did not know, driving home that evening with my sleeping granddaughter in the back seat, that it would be another 22 years before my father would finally find the courage to finish what he had almost said that day on the porch. It was not until I was 68 years old that I received the call I had, in some quiet corner of my heart, been both dreading and waiting for across 5 decades. My youngest brother, Amos, who still lived in the community and had over the years become the family member I communicated with most regularly, since he had a more relaxed view of technology than the rest and kept a cell phone hidden in his barn for emergencies, called me one afternoon with news that stopped my heart in my chest. He told me that our father, then 89 years old, had suffered a stroke, and that the doctors did not believe he had much time left. I drove to Pennsylvania that same day, a 9-hour drive that I do not remember clearly, except for the way my hands shook on the steering wheel the entire time. I arrived at my parents' home to find my father in a bed that had been moved into the front room, thinner than I had ever seen him, his once strong hands now pale and still against the quilt. A quilt, I noticed, that I myself had helped stitch as a girl of 13, one of the family quilts that had survived all these years. My mother had passed 6 years before, so it was my siblings and their children who filled the house, all of us gathered in that strange, sacred waiting that happens when a family knows the end is near. I sat by my father's bedside for 2 full days, holding his hand, watching him drift in and out of a thin sleep, and on the second evening, as the light was fading outside the window, exactly as it had been fading in that barn 53 years before, my father opened his eyes, and he looked directly at me. And he knew me. I could see it in his face, the recognition, the weight of decades passing between us in a single glance. He asked my siblings to leave the room. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but there was still an authority in it that none of us, even at our age, thought to question. When the door closed and it was just the 2 of us, my father took my hand in both of his, and he began to cry. And I want you to understand, I had never once in my entire life seen my father cry, not even at my mother's funeral, and the sight of those tears frightened me more than anything had frightened me since that evening in the barn. He said, "Ruth, I have carried a lie for 53 years, and I cannot go to my grave carrying it any longer." And then, in a voice broken by illness and by grief, held too long inside a single chest, my father finally told me the truth. He told me about Eli Stoltzfus. He told me things I had never known, things my mother had never known, things he had uncovered through months of quiet, careful investigation in the year before he sent me away. He told me that Eli's first wife, Katie, had not died from an accidental fall. Not truly, though the community had accepted that explanation because it was easier, because our community did not have the tools or the will to look deeper into a tragedy that seemed, on its surface, to be simply that, a tragedy. My father told me that he had spoken, quietly, secretly, to an English police officer he trusted, a man who owed my father a debt of gratitude for carpentry work he had done years before at a reduced cost during a hard season for that officer's family. My father told me that this officer had looked into old county records for him and had found that Katie Stoltzfus had made 2 visits to the county hospital in the 2 years before her death. Visits that had been recorded, quietly, as falls and accidents. Injuries that the attending English doctor, though bound by our community's preference for privacy, had noted with a private concern in his own records, concern that he had once mentioned in confidence to a relative who happened to also know my father. My father told me that he had also tracked down the family of the young woman from 2 counties over, the one who had broken her engagement to Eli suddenly, years before Katie. He told me that after much gentle persistence, that woman's own father, a man who understood exactly what my father was trying to protect his daughter from, had finally spoken plainly to him, and had told him 3 words that my father said had never left his mind in 53 years. He run, or she dies. That is what the man had said to my father, sitting across a fence line one autumn afternoon, 2 fathers who had never met before, bound together by a fear neither wanted to name aloud in a community that prized silence and forgiveness, and the avoidance of scandal above almost everything else. My father told me that he had made 3 separate trips that summer and early autumn under the pretense of visiting a lumber supplier 2 counties away. Trips that took him a full day each direction. Trips my mother believed were about securing a better price on cedar for a barn expansion he never actually built. He told me that on the 2nd of those trips, he had sat for nearly 2 hours with the young woman's father, a stern, guarded man who at first would not speak to him at all, until my father, in his own quiet way, simply sat with him in silence at that fence line for the better part of an hour, until the man's guard finally broke, and the words came pouring out of him, almost against his own will, as though he too had been waiting years for someone to ask him the right question. My father told me that the man wept as he spoke, describing bruises his daughter had tried to hide beneath her long sleeves during the brief months of her courtship with Eli, describing a broken engagement that had been framed to their community as the daughter's own flightiness, when in truth it had been the man himself who had physically pulled his daughter out of that courtship in the middle of the night, loading her into a wagon before dawn and driving her to relatives 3 districts away without a single word of explanation to anyone, not even to her. My father said that hearing this story was like looking into a mirror of what he himself would soon be forced to do, and that some part of him, sitting at that fence line, already knew, with a terrible certainty, exactly what his own next months would require of him. He told me he asked the man directly whether he had ever regretted the silence, the unexplained cruelty of that midnight departure, and the man had looked at him with hollow eyes and said only, "My daughter is alive, and Katie Stoltzfus is not, and there is no regret heavy enough to outweigh that difference." My father told me that once he understood what he was truly facing, he had a choice to make, and it was not a simple choice, not in our world. He could have gone to the bishop. He could have brought these suspicions before the church leadership and asked for Eli to be confronted, or at the very least, kept away from unmarried young women in our district. But my father told me that he feared, deeply and honestly, that without concrete proof, without a confession or a conviction, the church elders would see only a respected, land-owning widower being slandered by rumor and suspicion. A man who had, in the eyes of the community, already suffered the loss of a wife and did not deserve further hardship. He feared that bringing accusations forward without proof could destroy our family's standing in the community for generations, could be seen as bearing false witness, one of the gravest sins in our faith. He feared, above all, that even if he raised these concerns, the community's process was slow, deliberate, careful in a way that might take months, even years to resolve. And he did not believe I had months. He believed, in his heart, that I did not have the luxury of time. So my father made a choice that he told me, even at the end of his life, he still was not certain had been the right one, though he had lived with it as if it were. Because there had been no other path he could see that would guarantee my safety quickly enough, he decided that the fastest way, the only way he could be certain would work, was to remove me entirely from Eli's reach. Immediately, completely, in a way that would raise no questions, invite no further pursuit. And the only way to do that in our community, without inviting Eli or anyone else to ask why, without giving Eli any reason to follow me or to feel that I had been taken from him unjustly, was to make it appear as though I had brought shame upon myself, as though I were being cast out for my own failings, rather than being protected from someone else's. He told me that if the community believed I had left in disgrace, no one, especially not Eli, would think to pursue a girl who had shown herself unworthy, who had rebelled against her family and her faith. He told me that if instead he had simply forbidden the match and kept me close at home, Eli, who was by then deeply invested in courting me, and had grown, in my father's careful observation, increasingly possessive and insistent, might have found other ways, quieter ways, more dangerous ways, to still reach me, whether through manipulation of the courtship customs, through pressure applied to my mother, or through means my father, even as an adult man, was afraid to fully imagine. My father told me, and his voice broke completely as he said this part, that the hardest thing he had ever done in his entire life was to stand in that barn and tell his own daughter, a daughter he loved more than his own life, that she had shamed the family and must leave. Knowing that every word of it was a lie. Knowing that I would carry that lie in my heart for however many years it took. Not knowing if it would be 1 year, or 10 years, or, as it turned out, more than 5 decades before he could ever tell me the truth. He told me that he made a private vow to himself that night, standing alone in that barn after I had gone up to pack, that he would find a way to reveal the truth to me before he died, no matter how long it took, because he could not bear the thought of going to his grave with his daughter still believing she had done something wrong, still believing her own father had rejected her for a fault of her own making. He told me that every letter he wrote me over those years, every short, cold, formal letter, had been written and rewritten a dozen times in his mind before he ever put pen to paper, because he wanted desperately to write, "I love you. I am proud of you. I did this to save your life." But he was terrified that if any of those letters were somehow read by the wrong eyes, if Eli or anyone connected to him ever intercepted so much as a hint of the truth, it could still, even years later, put me in danger, or could unravel the fragile peace that had settled over Eli's suspicion once I was gone, and clearly, permanently, out of reach. He told me that Eli Stoltzfus had, in fact, asked about me for almost 2 full years after I left, asking my father directly, at church gatherings, at community auctions, why his daughter had truly left, whether I might ever return, whether my father had an address where a concerned family friend might write to check on my well-being. My father told me that each time he forced himself to remain cold, to repeat the same story of my shameful, rebellious departure, to discourage any further interest, and that each of those conversations felt, in his words, like swallowing broken glass, because every part of him wanted to defend me, to say his daughter had done nothing wrong. And every part of him knew that defending me even slightly might reopen a door he had worked so hard and so carefully to close forever. Eventually, my father told me, roughly 3 years after I had left, Eli Stoltzfus married again, a much younger woman from a community in Indiana, a marriage arranged rather quickly through a matchmaker connection, and my father said that from that day forward, he allowed himself, for the first time, to breathe a little easier, though the guilt of what he had put me through never once loosened its grip on him. I asked my father, sitting there at his bedside with his frail hands in mine, why he never told me sooner, even in secret, even in a private letter marked to be opened only by me. And he told me that in the early years he still feared word might somehow travel back, that our community, small and interconnected as it was, had ways of carrying information across long distances through visiting relatives and traveling preachers and shared correspondence, and he could never be fully certain that a letter, even one addressed only to me, might not somehow fall into hands that could still connect the pieces and realize what he had done, and why. And then, he said, as the years passed, and Eli's second wife bore him children, and life in the community moved on, and I built my own life far away, he told me that shame took over where fear had once lived. He said that with every passing year, the lie grew heavier, and the longer he waited, the harder it became to imagine finding the words, until decades had passed, and he did not know how to begin a conversation that undid 50 years of carefully maintained silence. He said, "Ruth, I know I stole something from you that I can never give back. I stole your trust in me for most of your life. I stole the chance for you to grow up knowing your father loved you without a doubt shadowing every memory. I stole the years we could have spent close, instead of you carrying a wound you did not deserve. And I am asking you now, at the very end of my life, not for you to say it does not matter, because it does matter. It mattered every single day for 53 years. I am asking only if you can find it somewhere in your heart to forgive an old man who believed, rightly or wrongly, that this was the only way he knew to keep his daughter alive. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. Sitting beside my dying father, finally holding the answer I had searched for across 4 decades of my life, I felt, first, an overwhelming grief. Grief for the 16-year-old girl I had once been, sitting alone on a bed in a stranger's house, believing herself unworthy of her own family's love. I felt grief for all the years I had spent second-guessing my own worth, entering relationships that did not deserve me, because some part of me still believed I had been cast aside for good reason. I felt grief for my father, too, for the 53 years he had spent carrying a secret so heavy it had clearly bent something inside him, for the choice he had been forced to make between 2 impossible paths, protecting me quickly through a lie, or protecting me slowly through the truth, and risking that it might not be fast enough. But underneath that grief, I felt something else too, something that surprised me even as I felt it. I felt an overwhelming, aching love for my father, deeper than I had ever felt it, even in the happiest days of my childhood on his shoulders, watching hawks circle the fields. Because in that moment, I understood, truly understood for the first time, that my father had not sent me away because he loved me too little. He had sent me away because he loved me more than his own reputation, more than his own comfort, more than his own relationship with me, more even than his own peace of mind for the rest of his natural life. He had chosen, in a single terrifying evening, to become the villain in his own daughter's story, so that she could remain safe from a danger she could not have seen coming on her own. I told my father, holding his hands as tightly as I could without hurting him, that I forgave him. I want to be honest and say that in truth, I had already forgiven him, years before, without ever knowing why, because I had decided somewhere in my 30s that I would rather live with an unanswered question than live with a heart full of bitterness toward the man who taught me to love the hawks in the sky. But hearing the truth that evening did something more than forgiveness alone could do. It gave me back the years. It gave me back the meaning of every silent moment we had shared, every extra piece of pie slipped to me at the supper table, every evening on the porch step, saying nothing at all. It told me that all of it had been real, that his love for me had never once wavered, not even for a single day of those 53 years, even when every letter he sent me had to pretend otherwise. My father passed away 3 days later, with all of his children gathered around him, in the same front room where he had told me the truth. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and I want you to know, there was no anger left in that room, no 53 years of silence weighing down the air. There was only peace, the kind of peace that comes when a wound that has been carried for decades is finally allowed to close. At his funeral, which was held according to our old traditions, simple and plain and without excess, I stood at the graveside surrounded by siblings and nieces and nephews I had missed knowing for so many years, and I thought about all the ways a story can look different depending on which piece of it you are standing inside of. For 53 years, my story had been one of abandonment, of a father who cast his daughter aside for reasons unknown, and in truth, the whole time, it had been a story of a father who loved his daughter so fiercely that he was willing to be misunderstood, even by her, even by his own community, even by himself in his quietest moments of doubt, if it meant keeping her safe. In the months after my father's funeral, I found myself unable to simply let the story rest, even though I had already forgiven him fully and had no doubt at all about the truth of what he told me. Some part of me, the same restless part my mother used to warn, was too much like my father's own nature, needed to see the edges of the story confirmed with my own eyes, not because I distrusted him, but because I think I needed, after 53 years of confusion, to hold something solid in my hands. I asked my brother Amos if he knew what had become of Eli Stoltzfus, and he told me that Eli had passed away himself nearly a decade earlier. An old man by then, having lived out his final years in the Indiana community, where he had moved after his second marriage. Amos told me, carefully, that there had been quiet whispers over the years, whispers our own family had never repeated aloud out of respect for the dead and fear of bearing false witness. That Eli's second wife had also suffered a series of unexplained injuries during their early years of marriage, though nothing ever came of it publicly. And she had gone on, eventually to raise their children and live what appeared, from the outside, to be an ordinary, quiet Amish life. I do not know, and I will never know with certainty, the full truth of that woman's marriage. And I want to be careful here not to make accusations about a man who is no longer living to answer for himself. But I will say that hearing even this much confirmed something my father had believed with his whole heart, enough to risk his relationship with his own daughter for over half a century in order to keep me away from it. I also, some years later, through a mutual acquaintance in the Ohio Mennonite community, where I had first stayed with my mother's cousin Fanny, managed to make contact with the daughter of the man my father had spoken to at that fence line so many decades before. The young woman who had been pulled from her engagement in the middle of the night. She was an old woman herself by the time we spoke on the telephone, her voice thin and careful, and when I explained who I was and why I was calling, there was a long silence on the line before she finally said, "Your father was a good man." I have thought of him many times over the years, wondering if he ever found the courage to do for you what my own father did for me. I told her that he had, though it had taken him 53 years to find the words to explain it. And she was quiet again for a moment before she said, 53 years is a long time to carry a secret that heavy, but I understand why he did. My own father never told anyone outside our family what he had done or why, not until the day he died, and even then, only a few of us ever knew the full truth. Some kinds of love, she told me, are simply too dangerous to speak aloud until the danger has fully passed. That conversation gave me a strange kind of peace, a sense that my father's choice, however painful, had not been some isolated, incomprehensible decision, but had belonged to a quiet, unspoken tradition among certain fathers in our world. Men who chose to become villains in their daughters' eyes, rather than risk a danger they could not fully prove or control through the community's slower, more public channels. I do not know how many other daughters out there are still living with an unexplained wound like mine, still waiting for a father who may never find the courage or the time to explain himself before it is too late. I think of them often now, and I hope in sharing this story that perhaps one of them might find the courage to ask the question I asked my mother that day in her kitchen so many years ago. Or that perhaps one of their fathers might find, in this story, the courage my own father found only at the very end of his life. I have thought many times, in the years since my father passed, about what I would want people to take from this story, if I ever had the chance to share it, and now I have that chance, sitting here telling it to you. I think the first thing I would want you to know is that forgiveness does not require understanding to come first. I forgave my father decades before I understood why he did what he did, and I believe that forgiveness is what allowed me to still recognize love when the truth finally arrived, instead of a heart too hardened by resentment to receive it. The second thing I would want you to know is that the people who love us do not always show that love in ways we can immediately understand, and sometimes the hardest choices a person makes are the ones that look, from the outside, exactly like rejection, exactly like abandonment, exactly like something has gone wrong, when in truth, it might be the deepest form of protection a person knows how to give. I am not saying every painful choice a parent makes is secretly born of love. I know that is not always true, and I know some children carry wounds from parents who genuinely failed them, and I would never tell those children to simply assume there is a hidden noble reason behind every hurt. But I am saying that sometimes there is more beneath the surface of our family's silences than we are given the chance to see, and it is worth asking, when we can, gently and honestly, before we let bitterness make its permanent home in our hearts. I have also come to think a great deal about the man my father might have become if he had chosen a different path that autumn evening in the barn, if he had gone to the bishop instead, if he had insisted on a public reckoning rather than a private sacrifice. I do not know, even now, whether that path would have kept me safer or put me in greater danger. I do not know whether the church elders would have believed him, or whether Eli Stoltzfus, confronted openly, might have grown more dangerous rather than less. My father carried that same uncertainty his entire life, and I think, In some ways, that uncertainty was its own kind of punishment, heavier perhaps than if he had known with total confidence that he had made the only possible right choice. There is a particular grief in doing something difficult and never being fully certain it was the correct thing to do. And I have come to admire my father more, not less, for having acted anyway, under the weight of that uncertainty. Because he judged that doing something imperfect and immediate was better than doing nothing while he waited for perfect clarity that might never have come. I think, too, about my own children and the choices I have made raising them, choices that felt right in the moment and that I have questioned many times since. I told my son once, when he was a teenager angry with me over a curfew he thought unreasonable, that someday he might understand why I made the rules I made, and he looked at me with such open resentment that it took my breath away, because I saw, in that look, an echo of my own younger self, sitting in that barn, begging my father to explain a punishment that made no sense to me. I did not have a dangerous man circling my son the way Eli had once circled me, but I understood, in that moment, something of what it must have cost my father to hold his silence even while his own child looked at him with such pain and confusion in her eyes. It is a particular kind of suffering, to do something for someone's own good, and to be hated, even briefly, for it. I also want to say something to any of you watching this who may be estranged from a parent right now, who may be sitting with a silence you do not understand, a wound that has never been explained to you. I am not going to tell you that every unexplained silence hides a story of secret protection and sacrifice. I know that is not always the truth, and I would never want to give false comfort to someone whose pain comes from a parent who genuinely failed them, who made choices out of selfishness or cruelty rather than love. But I will say this, if there is any way, any safe way, to ask the question directly, to sit across from that parent, or write them a letter, or make the long drive home, even after years of silence, I would encourage you to do it while you still can. I nearly did not get the chance. Had my father's stroke come on a little faster, had I arrived just one day later than I did, I would have spent the rest of my life carrying a story that was never true. And he would have died carrying a truth he desperately wanted to set down. The third thing I would want you to know, and perhaps this is the most important thing, is that my father lived 53 years believing he might never get the chance to make things right. And he was nearly correct. Had that stroke taken him just a little faster, had I arrived at his bedside just one day later, I might have spent the rest of my own life never knowing the truth, believing until my own final breath that I had been cast away for a fault of my own making. I think about that possibility often, and it has taught me never to let unspoken truths sit too long in the quiet corners of my life. If there is something you have been afraid to say to someone you love, a truth, an apology, an explanation you have been putting off because the moment never feels quite right, I would gently urge you, from the bottom of an old woman's heart, do not wait as long as my father waited. Do not assume there will always be more time. I still live not far from where Robert and I raised our children, though both of them are grown now with families of their own. I go back to visit my father's grave, and my mother's beside it, every autumn, when the leaves along the fence lines begin to turn the same way they were turning on the evening he sent me away. The old farm itself was sold out of our family many years ago, to an English family who keep horses on it now. But the family cemetery where my parents' rest remains, tended still by my brother Amish and his sons. A small square of quiet ground surrounded by a low iron fence, shaded in autumn by the same kind of maples that used to line our lane when I was a girl. I sit there for a while each time, and I tell my father about my grandchildren, about the life I built, about the woman his difficult, painful choice allowed me to become. I tell him about my granddaughter, the one he held on that porch so many years ago, who has grown now herself, with children of her own, none of whom ever knew their great-grandfather, but all of whom have heard, by now, at least some version of this story, because I made a decision, after his passing, that I would not let his sacrifice disappear into the same silence that had once concealed it. I wanted my grandchildren to know that their great-grandfather was not simply a stern, distant figure in old photographs and half-remembered stories, but a man capable of the kind of love that asks nothing in return, not even understanding, not even the comfort of being known rightly by the very person he was protecting. I think, too, on those autumn visits, about my mother, resting beside him, a woman who carried her own version of that silence for over 5 decades, without ever once knowing the full truth of what her husband had done. Or why? I have wondered many times whether my father ever considered telling her, in private, away from the risk of the wider community, and Amos told me once that he believed our father had in fact come close to telling her on more than one occasion over the years, but had always stopped himself, afraid that even she, however loyal and however discreet, might carry some small trace of the truth in her manner toward Eli or his family that could unravel the careful peace he had built. I think my mother went to her own grave still believing, in some quiet corner of her heart, that her husband had made a harsh and perhaps unnecessary decision about their daughter. And I have made my own peace with the fact that she never received the same gift of understanding I was given in those final days at his bedside. I visit her grave with a particular tenderness because of this, wishing I could tell her, too, what I now know, wishing I could ease whatever quiet doubts she may have carried about the husband she loved, and the daughter she lost for so many years. And every single time, before I leave that small fenced square of ground, I whisper the same 3 words to that quiet stone. Words I wish I had been able to say to him more freely across all those lost years. I forgive you, Father. I forgive you. And I understand. And I love you. Just as much as I did when I was a small girl on your shoulders, watching hawks circle over a field that no longer belongs to our family, but that will always belong in my heart to him. And then, before I walk back to my car, I say one more thing to that quiet stone, something I did not understand to say until very recently in my own long life. I tell him, thank you, for choosing me over your own comfort, for choosing me over your own good name, for choosing me even when choosing me meant becoming, for over 50 years, the villain in the only story I had to explain my own life. I do not know how many daughters out there could say the same of their own fathers. And I hope, if you are listening to this and you have a father like mine, flawed and silent and human, but willing in the end to carry whatever weight was necessary to keep you safe, that you find a way to tell him thank you too, before the years run out for both of you. I do not tell this story to paint myself as someone especially wise or especially forgiving. I tell it because I was, for most of my life, simply an ordinary woman, doing her best to make sense of an extraordinary pain. And I think there is comfort in knowing that ordinary people can, eventually, find their way to peace, even when the answers take decades longer to arrive than we would ever wish. If you are sitting somewhere right now with your own unanswered question, your own quiet grief about a parent, a sibling, a friend who once did something that broke your heart and never explained why, I want you to know that it is possible to keep loving them in the meantime. It is possible to set down bitterness before you ever receive an explanation, and to still leave the door open, gently, patiently, for the day the truth might finally walk through it. My father taught me many things across his long life, but I think the last lesson he taught me, in that quiet front room, with the autumn light fading outside the window, was the most important one of all. That love does not always announce itself clearly, and that sometimes the deepest love a person can offer is the kind that is willing to be misunderstood for as long as it takes to keep the people we cherish most safe from harm. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it moved you even a little, please remember to like this video, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story, and let me know down in the comments where you are watching from. Because it means more to this old woman than you might ever know, to feel that these words have traveled somewhere far beyond this quiet room where I am telling them. Until next time, may you hold your own families a little closer, and may you never be afraid to ask the questions that have been sitting, unspoken, in your heart for far too long.